Hi, all, and welcome to our panel on cross-industry collaboration, setting standards for the future of DEI. My name is Jim Hyington. I'm Chief of Staff for DEI at Google, and I will be the moderator today. And joining me are four very esteemed panelists. We have Aisha Berry, who's the Chief Diversity Officer of DocuSign, and the Head of People Experience. In this role, Aisha focuses on accelerating the DocuSign diversity, inclusion, belonging, and people experience strategies, as well as currently oversees and continues to evolve DocuSign impact and sustainability efforts. We also have with us Bo-Young Lee, who's the Chief Diversity Officer for Uber, Yemi Akasanya, the Chief Diversity Officer for Groupon, and Trey Boynton, the Chief Diversity Officer for Chief. For everybody who's watching this right now, at the bottom of your screen, you should see a link to ask questions. Feel free to add yours. We'll actually be tackling those at the end of the session. But why don't we go ahead and dive in with some of the conversations and topics that we on this panel have all been talking about right now. So to start, I would like to commend the companies for the work that you've been doing to set some very ambitious and publicly stated diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. One of the questions that I have for you all is, how did you ensure that you were actually genuinely challenging yourselves when you were setting these ambitions, and what are you doing to hold those leaders accountable? Bo, I might like to start with you. I know there's been some very bold anti-racism goals that your company has set.
Sure, yeah. And for us, it was a no-brainer for us to both set goals and then very publicly share them. And part because I think there's no other company that's had more of its tea spilled in the public space than Uber and all the challenges that we faced. And so for us, being very public, being very bold in setting our goals and targets has been part of that journey of transparency and accountability for us. In terms of ensuring that we are truly challenging ourselves in terms of the publicly stated goals that we've had for our gender and our race ethnicity representation, we looked at what would look like for us historically, like the improvements we've made, and we said, we're going to go beyond that. So what we've done to this point, that's not good enough. We're going to double the pace at which significantly increase the pace. And so that's how we knew that was one way for us to say, what we've been doing historically is not good enough. We're going to push ourselves further. I think the other side of wanting to making sure that our goals were real is I think a lot of companies made some commitments, particularly anti-racism commitments, right after the murder and lynching of George Floyd. And Uber, we actually took our time. The events obviously unfolded during May and June, and Uber we waited until I think almost August before we came out. And part of the reason why we took so long to do that is because there was a whole series of discussions within the organization. And one of the things I told the organization is the goals aren't going to be all coming from my world. It's not just coming from DEI. I want goals set within the business. I want it within our mobility business, our delivery business. I want our engineer and our technology businesses as well. And I said, you're going to set them, but I'm going to vet them. I'm going to make sure that they're not just superficial. If I think they're superficial, I'm not going forward with going out to the public saying we're making these bold goals, because we're not. And I think having those conversations, pushing our leaders to come up with something that they would own. We have a Racial Equity Leadership Council that is our accountability body, and it's made up, I don't chair it, I'm just a member of it. It's chaired by a business leader, and that's how we ensure that people are moving forward.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Yemi, I'm wondering about additional angles of this. I know a lot of companies set goals around their workforce and their workplace, but at Groupon, you've also set some additional goals. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, indeed. And I'll do my best not to be redundant with Bo, but I think I love the question about challenge. And I think the greatest challenge with integrating DEI is trying to integrate this into all aspects of the business, beyond human capital. We're building a resilient, engaged, and energized team of collaborative people from all over the world who also reflect the diversity of our merchants, our customers, our suppliers, and so on and so forth. So how do we truly make sure that we're tying that into a business case? And so at Groupon, we truly believe in the business case for DEI. And if we do this well, we can better support our mission, which is to be the go-to and trusted destination for experiences. So we do also, and we're proud of sharing, our data publicly and the progress we've made in advancing the diversity of our workforce. but we were quite clear that we want to do even better. And so it's not an exercise with an end date. It's something that is ever evolving, work in progress. And we're on this journey. And as we are on this journey, we would continue to be transparent and report action. So, and I'll personally share, and I know this probably speaks, maybe a little controversial, speaks against the ACT report, that I love the ACT report, but I personally feel that quotas can sometimes be too limited and maybe even too prescribed. But I also think the benefit of that, it speaks to another core purpose of metrics, which is with regards to like promoting progress, right? The idea is that what does success look like? Well, in this case, we're promoting progress, and progress is success. So at Groupon, we're making this effort with regards to improving representation and harnessing a diverse workforce by keenly focusing on diverse candidate slates. And so we believe that if our hiring managers are presented with diverse slates of candidates, they will hire the best talent. And we're confident that that talent will come from across the diversity dimensions. And I think it starts at the very top. So we've adopted a diverse talent search policy, popularly known or coined as the Rooney Rule, where for every single board seat, female and minority candidates must be included in our initial search pool of candidates. So the idea here is that we will continue to adopt a diverse candidate slate across all our protocols across all levels. And this might be a small, but I think a very important step forward. And Jim, to your point, we're keenly focused on our merchants as well, right? So the idea is like, how do we serve our merchants in a way where we can help identify who are our women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, and ensure that these businesses who enable not just our economy, but the work that we do here at Groupon, how do we ensure that, with what has happened through the pandemic and the disproportionate impact that we've seen across small businesses, women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, what are we doing as a company to support them? And I'll be happy to talk about that in a little bit more detail later.
Thank you. I really appreciate that dimension of the conversation. One of the things that you mentioned there was data. And I think, the collection of DEI data is obviously a cornerstone of a lot of the work that we're doing here. I think we also know actually taking that data and putting it to work for the things that we need to drive forward right now brings with it a whole different set of challenges. So Aisha, I'd love to understand a little bit at DocuSign about how that your company is using that data to identify inequities and really understand the differences in experiences between all the communities.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jim. And just continuing on with the points that both Bo and Yummy made, it is about being able to drive accountability and ensuring that the work that we're doing is woven not only to every aspect of the employee life cycle, not just the employee life cycle, but every aspect of our business cycle. And so at DocuSign, since I've joined, we've taken a global assessment, a very strategic approach where we're leveraging a neurological approach to not only assessing our data from a workforce perspective, a workplace perspective, and a marketplace perspective. And so we are in no short of being able to access the data, but to your point, what is it that we're going to do with the data? And so the representation can share with us those opportunities where we see opportunities to grow talent at every level within the organization. Our workplace data is where I've been able to get the sentiment of the employees agnostic to what level they are within the organization. From a marketplace perspective, what we've been able to uncover is how that then shows up and translates into our organization's ability to capitalize and broaden or deepen with our customer segmentation. And so with that, it is also equally important to us, and what we've been doing is gathering the voice of the employee or the VOE, so that you have overlay of not only the data, leading with the data, but also the employee's direct experience of how they are experiencing the organization. And therein lies the intersection of the work that I'm doing, not only leading diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity at DocuSign, but also that intersection of people experience, because ultimately our underpinning is equitable experiences for all. What we've uncovered is being able to look at the data different than just representation. I've just pulled some more data that I've shared with our chief people officer to be able to identify the depth of the organization, which allows us to see how far down in the organization does a leader, starting with our new CEO, have to go before he touches a diverse talent. That tells a very different story than all of diverse representation. And so it's one thing to state and publicly share goals, of which we, like Groupon and Uber, we have goals, we share our data. We've got a 4-year horizon. Actually, we've got our goals set to achieve by FY24. It's another thing to become very surgical with the data and understand what the data is actually telling us in a new and different way, and coupling that with the VOE of the employee to inform our strategies and interventions. And so that's how we've been able to leverage the data. And that's ultimately led us to thinking through new and different ways of not just attracting talent. That's one lever. That's oftentimes the lever that we pivot on, but retaining, growing, and developing talent. So pulling through that talent through our leadership pipeline. And that depth report has truly allowed us to unlock opportunity and the discussions that need to happen at the executive level to say, hey, we've got opportunity, or you're doing something great. What can we pull through in our product and or technology organization that may be happening in our enterprise functions? And so that's how we're leveraging the data to get things done in this space and drive equitable experiences.
I love that. I mean, the breadth of the way that you have combined and thought about it from an entirety of people experience, and then depth report. That's fantastic. I'm writing that down. I love that. Speaking of things that I love and write down, Trey, one of the phrases that you use a lot is data ethics. Could you talk to us a little bit about how you think of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, it's the practices by which we operate with integrity with the data that we are gifted with from our people. When our people tell us who they are, they're trusting us with the information to do right by that work. And that means instituting things like governance and privacy and being really intentional about the transparency to the people of what we intend to do with it. Because when you collect it, there is an assumption made that when I tell you this, you will do something with it. What that something is, it could be vastly different no matter who answers the question. And so in order to be thoughtful and intentional about the transparency piece, understanding and level setting expectations of, does this mean you will do X, Y, Z? No, it means we will do this part and this part. And so it's the practices and the pieces there, because for me as a Series B growth company, we are growing our data stack. This is early, so I represent a little bit of a perspective. I'm trying to grow into a fully baked kind of really robust diversity data kind of stack and information gathering and sense making. Part of that process is also setting up the practices internally with the folks who are managing and handling the data, that they are doing that with thoughtfulness and intention, and also creating the type of philosophical choices around data integrity that include things like, when will we stop reporting? Because for us we change every month. We are a Series B growth company, and we are changing and growing rapidly. And people are constantly moving around. For us, it's important to say, what is that end, and how much intersecting the data and that kind of clinical, I love that you talked about that, of how do you get specific? Because we do want to know what the lived experience of folks with multiple identities. But being thoughtful about how deep we go with that, given our numbers, and what is our threshold then to move forward, those are the types of things that philosophically we need to ground ourselves in as we grow our data stack and our practices, so that as we scale, as we grow, and as we get to critical mass, these questions are already embedded, so we don't have to ask and go back and recover. We are planning for that in the future.
That's such a fascinating perspective, talking about from startup to scale there. I really like that. Yummy, if I might kind of skip around for a little bit, I'd love to hear from your perspective about some of the gaps, some of the company gaps that you have when it comes to DEI data, and how you're thinking about either working around or filling those gaps.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it feels so good to be on a panel with other experts that love data just as much as I think I do. And what you hear across a theme is that as a result of this data-driven approach, you would see that our DEI program is influenced by our findings, includes a range of initiatives and programs that all have this overarching goal in making our stakeholders feel, who are employees and again, customers, merchants, feel seen, valued, and inclusive. But what we've also seen, especially for organizations who are global in nature, and have offices or reach internationally, we've also seen how data privacy laws in many global regions, like for example the European Union, can restrict our ability to capture accurate demographic data. And so what happens is that there's an imbalance, whereas in the US, you have a mature set of data. However, abroad, you find yourself with tremendous gaps in fragmented data. So and what I've found most challenging with regards to with data is that the definitions of diversity dimension differ abroad as they do in the US. And what that does is it makes it very difficult to analyze and compare data across regions. So some countries have and use very narrow and medically certified classifications, while others might rely on employee self-disclosure data. And this is part of what why I'm very excited about the work, and I hope Bo wouldn't mind sharing at some point in this call about the work that Bo and Uber and Google are doing, where there's this collaboration to help identify and define the diversity classification internationally, and they're working with a bunch of non-for-profits and localized organizations to do that work, and that will be such rich data to kind of help us hopefully all kind of come on the same page with regards to, for example, what does underrepresentation mean in the U.S. versus in Europe? When you think about minority communities, who are you speaking with, who are you speaking to? So although I'm based in Chicago, where our headquarters is located, I'm currently on a 6-month international assignment in EMEA region. And over the past several months, I've been living in the UK, meeting with our teammates, getting a deeper understanding of our DEI program and experience through the international lens. And one big part that's been so helpful for us is our employee resource groups. It's just been incredible to learn from our colleagues who are based in our international offices, to share their stories, and to really create a space for underrepresentation and certain groups to allow us to kind of get deeper insights in ways where we cannot get through data. So these are some ways we're trying to navigate the data privacy issue, but it's a real issue and it's really disruptive, especially for companies who really depend and utilize data tools informing and inspiring their strategies.
Thank you, Yemi. I mean, first of all, you're doing my job for me, so I'm just going to log off and let y'all talk. You don't need me here. But you did touch on you did touch on the work that Bo's doing, and Bo, I'd love to hear a little bit more. I mean, I think Yemi talked a little bit about some of the compliance and the regulatory difficulties in collecting global workforce data. I think there's also additional, difficulties just on culture and comfortabilities that people have in just sharing parts of themselves in a workplace. How do you at Uber think about navigating all of those different challenges with the end goal of having accurate global workforce data?
Absolutely. So, I am a economics PhD dropout. I love data. Data is like my life. It's the beauty in math is what I always tell people. And when I joined Uber, the first thing I wanted to do is I wanted to take a look at our data, and I realized there were huge gaps in the data that we had. I couldn't at the time I joined in 2018, I couldn't give you a really accurate picture of what our workforce looked like. And so I set off very clearly going, if we're going to be a data-driven organization and we're going to make decisions based on what our workforce looks like, we need to have a good picture. So about three and a half years ago, actually 4 years ago, we set off to completely redesign our global self-ID, and we expanded the global self-ID to be completely global. So it includes all of our 66 plus countries. And we were going to customize the categories so that they fit to what the diversity of that population looks like. So the ethnicity questions, that race and ethnicity questions we ask in the US look different from those that we ask in our various EMEA countries, Africa, Middle East, Latin America, Asia. And one of the things that, and we expanded it to 8 different categories beyond simply race, ethnicity, and gender, but sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, and we even expanded it to things like caregiver status and also socioeconomic status of childhood. We use proxy questions for that because socioeconomic diversity is one thing that we really try to focus on. One of the things that we found when we did this is first we ran into the issues that Yemi talked about, is like, you know, the legislated restrictions. But what we actually found when we started having conversations with our employment lawyers is that the laws are a lot less restrictive than a lot of people think. It is about how your lawyers interpret those laws. So there are only 2 countries in the world where we don't, out of our 66 plus countries, where we don't capture race ethnicity data because it is illegal. And France is one of them, and then there's another country as well. But what we found is that for a lot of countries that had restrictions, it's not necessarily that you can't capture, it's about how you capture, how you communicate, how you utilize, and like like, for example, every single request for self-identified list of data has to be approved by me. There's not a single point in time, even if Dara, our CEO, were to ask the question, can I get a list of all the employees with their self-identified information? I have to go to Dara going, how are you going to use it? You know, what's the purpose? Is it justified? And that's how we stay in compliance around the world. And I think those conversations took us like 10 months to have, but we were able to do that. Once we actually launched our global self-ID, what we found is, to your point, Jim, the question you ask is, there were so many cultural barriers to try to capture this. We're now in our 3rd year of our global self-ID. And in each year we've done communication, huge communication campaigns to try to educate people. This is why we're capturing it. Because in the United States, usually when you get a self-ID survey, you fill it out because you grow up in the United States like being, yes, I'm Asian or Black or whatever, and checking it off. And we do it from childhood all the way to adulthood. But if you go to a place like Japan, or even countries like Qatar or Dubai, they've never been asked to fill out those kinds of self-ID. So they're very dubious, very skeptical about what you're doing. And so when we first ran our global self-ID, we found like response rate like 18, 19%. Now that we're in our 3rd year, we've done a lot of education, a lot of communication around it. We are actually now able to report, and internally we talk about this, we actually now can share both our caregiver status, because we have that at a 80+ response rate threshold. We're also able to do it for gender identity and sexual orientation. We can also share in several of our countries, South Africa, US, UK, Brazil, race ethnicity data, because we have that over 80%. But it's really interesting to see the differences, and actually the differences in response rate give us some idea of where we have to focus. Our response rates, as I said, like for gender identity, sexual orientation, is above the threshold, but our self-identification for disability is down in the 30s, which means that we have an issue with disability awareness and people with disabilities feeling safe. It shouldn't be at 30%. So that gives us, so now I'm going to prioritize disabilities as a big pillar for the next few years. And then going back to what Yemi was talking about, part of what we realized as we were collecting this data is that we really don't know. There's a very poor understanding around the world of what underrepresented peoples look like, whether the forces of immigration, refugee, war, slavery, colonization have around the world. And so earlier this year, we launched a global, what we call underrepresented peoples, a project where we began to work with NGOs around the world to look at things like religion, to look at things like colonization, how it impacted. Very few countries actually, like if countries don't have a robust diversity and inclusion conversation, and most countries around the world don't, then they don't have good categorization. And so that's what we're trying to solve. And we're pretty much wrapped up with the main portion of the research. And I'm hoping that sometime next year, we'll actually be able to share what our learnings have been.
That's fascinating. I can't wait to read that when that comes out. Bo, I'm going to keep you in the hot seat if you don't mind. Uber and Google have been working closely with the Action to Catalyze Tech and Snap and the Aspen Institute, really to kind of think about what standardization of DEI data might look like, both the collection of the data, the reporting of the data, kind of broadly across the industry. I'll just ask a basic question there. Why? why is this important to Uber? Why do you think this is worth the effort we're putting into it?
Absolutely. So I am a believer of the power of community. I am the believer of the power of collective action as well. And so when I joined Uber, I've been working in diversity and inclusion for about 20 years. And the thing I've always loved about this community, especially when I first began doing it, and there wasn't a lot of companies focused on it or a lot of practitioners, is whenever you found a practitioner that out in the wild, I said, like, you meet somebody who works in DEI, you're like, oh my God, there's another one of you. You sort of created this community. And the wonderful thing about the community is that we would share all our practices. You'd be like, hey, have you ever done a transgender transition? Do you have some transgender transition guidelines? And someone would be like, oh, I created some, here, take it, use it, do what you want. I feel like as the wonderful thing about watching this profession and this focus on DEI expand over the last 20 years, I feel like this sense of like natural community that we created, there's just so many more folks out there, right? There's so many amazing people who are doing this work, like the three others that I'm sitting here with, Trey, Yemi, and Aisha. And I feel like sometimes that sense of community has eroded. So you might have that question, who's doing global self-ID? Who's doing something? And you don't know who to ask, right? And I feel like ACT and what Snap has tried to recreate is that sense of like, we're doing this collectively. When one company rises, all of us rise. If there's something amazing that like Una at Snap is doing, I want to know about it. I can't wait to share what we're doing at Uber with the rest of the community regarding underrepresented peoples, because that will make, and sometimes I even like slip it in. I'm like, hey, Uber's doing this thing. Use this as a little bit of pressure to your organization saying, they're doing it, we should do it too. And I want that, I want the same thing. I want to be able to say, Google's doing this, we need to do it. So that was really just the why behind it, is like, we all grow when we work together.
Yeah, I hear you saying two things there, and it strikes me they're actually just very common principles across tech as an industry, and beyond just the spheres of DEI. The first is open source, right? Like open sourcing, sharing what we're doing, like that's just common practice on the end side of the business. So let's bring that over to the people side of the business too. And we're all asking ourselves very similar questions and grappling with it. I think a lot of people tend to think like, well, you've got it figured out in the US, so just why can't you figure it outside the US? And a lot of us know that the genesis of the work in the US, we didn't figure it out. It was told to us. It was EEOC, it was compliance. We actually haven't built the muscle of figuring it out. So there is no muscle that we can take and apply towards other contexts. We're all learning and all sharing there. And the other side of it, I think, is the human side of it to not lose sight of in the data, right? Which is, as a tech company, we're all used to data and numbers and knowing what you measure matters. And I always say when we're talking about people, what you're really saying is who you measure matters. And how are we ensuring that everybody feels like they're showing up in the work, that the parts of themselves that are deeply held and very personal to them, that the company is saying that matters and they're seeing themselves reflected in the work as well. Trey, I know you're also a data nerd at heart, like both of us as well. Are there any thoughts that you have on kind of like the larger benefits of this collective work as well?
Well, I think at the beginning, standards help us understand what we're doing collectively. It's like, so if we're all using different methodologies and practices, when we kind of look across companies, across tech, we get to say, oh, well, this is not the same Apple. This is like a Granny Smith, and this is like a Crisp, and you have all these different things that you're comparing. But if we actually, I think what it allows us to do is to tell a compelling story that is truly collective. When we are all operating from the same operating manual in terms of data, categorization, methodology, practices, and those insights and how we tell stories, how are we measuring the who and the practices, the ethical practices behind that. I think what happens is you set this kind of baseline that allows us all to sing, we all have the sheet music. And then we can really kind of share the story of what is actually happening in tech. Because I think when we are operating a little bit over here and a little bit over there, yes, with all of the kind of like have at it process that we've been doing and the discovery that we've done both in pockets of consultation and collaboration, but when it's open and public and transparent and we can all point, it becomes a North Star. It becomes a way for us to have a way to wayfind in our own organizations and then come out of that together with a single story. And I think what it does, it also creates the trust that I think is so critical. It creates a trust and a transparency that allows people to say, well, when I go here and tell you who I am, here's what that means. And it's not that this person in this role decided this or this committee did this one day, but that it creates a standard and a baseline by which people can have confidence that it's being used for a greater good. That collectivist, Bo and I talk about, we love collectivism. That's the jam, right? The whole point is so that we can tell a singular kind of tale, but then also have the metrics and the science to back it up to say, here's what we mean when we say belonging. What you have kind of thought about as kind of this concept, here's the commonality, here's the theme of the data across various industries. When you take our 4 companies and we are all showing you our data in a same method that SNAP and that that's an initiative that the ACT initiative is trying to do, that is going to be some beautiful, beautiful insight. And it allows people to understand truly the brilliance that's behind the people in these companies, but also the way in which diversity officers are handling and capturing this data to serve our businesses. I think it's big.
Yemi, I'm going to go rogue for a second and call on you before we go to Aisha and then take some questions from the audience. But I think I'd be remiss when we're talking about data collection if I didn't actually ask the one person on this panel who's sitting outside the US right now, just any thoughts that you have on it. So I know I'm cold calling on you here, but any thoughts that you have just from the perspective of where you're sitting right now, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And you know, it's hard to even share more than what Bo just said. You know, again, you know, I'll be honest with you. We provided a DEI experience survey with our colleagues last November and asked them about, you know, their experiences at Groupon. And we broke the data down by region, right? So North America, EMEA, and APAC. And just to be candid, one of the things we saw was that vastly majority of our international colleagues felt that our DEI programming was extremely North America influenced and focused. I mean, so things are literally just time. And so for me, it was a matter of, okay, what can we do to ensure that we are, you know, truly building a equitable culture. So you know, we quickly hired a leader in our DI team internationally. It's in our Dublin office. I'm spending 6 months here learning, and it's truly redefining all that I know about DEI. This has been an experience of a lifetime. And I'll give you some examples. For example, in the US, our employees resource groups are very popular. In our survey, about 60 to 70% of our colleagues in the US are all familiar with ERGs and all participating in ERG events. When you look at the EMEA, that number was about 20%. And when you look at APAC, it's about 10%, right? So obviously that's a vehicle that might be you know, popular, great, and valued in the US, but not so much in EMEA. So the question, and internationally, so the question is, how do we begin to grow that? And so this is just looking through the lens of our you know, human capital. Here's the other one that's interesting. You know, we know at Groupon that we could do more with identifying our women and minority-owned businesses to ensure that our platform is more representative and spotlighting, you know, these different communities to our customers. And I'll give you an example. In 2020, we did a search for Black-owned businesses, which is a keyword term on our entire platform. And would you believe that Black-owned businesses, the searches for this keyword were up 400% for the full year of 2020 versus 2019. So it means that there is this increased interest from consumers that we, you know, as a business, believe will translate into sales for our merchants, that they're seeking more Black-owned businesses, more women-owned businesses. So in response, you know, during, for example, August, the month of August, which is known as Black Business Month, we run a campaign, a marketing campaign, where we feature Black-owned business in our platform. And we've seen increases in units sold and business sold and so forth, right? So the idea here is that in the US, we're seeing quite maturity in using data to identify opportunities that are benefiting not just our employees, but also our customers and our merchants. Internationally, we just feel like we're still a bit of ways from being able to collect the data. But Bo, thank you for saying that there is a way around this. And so I'll be at the door tomorrow morning, virtual door, knocking on our door to say, what can we do to continue to expand and making sure that we're taking some of the things that we're able to do with more flexibility in the US internationally as well.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you. Aisha, the flip side of this, such a focus on the data is that people think DEI work just becomes checkbox. How do you respond to that? How do you get people to understand maybe a different narrative or a different side of thinking of things that way?
Yeah, I'm just going to give you a very practical solution, or my very practical response. Is one thing for a firm to measure itself against itself. It's another thing for the firm to measure itself against a collective. When you think about the practice of DEI work, and we've seen it as both shared this, huge uptick, if you will, due to the murder of George Floyd. So it took a moment for the world to recognize that the work that has to be done in culture, in creating inclusive environments, ensuring that every identity that reflects diversity in its primary sense all the way through to the tertiary sense. And they make, dare I say, 4 levels of diverse identity are feeling seen, valued, and heard. We don't drive this work as if we go and pick out our favorite bag of potato chips. It's just like any other business decision. At the end of the day, our customers are becoming increasingly globally diverse, and they are demanding, those firms that they represent, those firms are also demanding that the individuals that are working on their particular accounts reflect the diversity of the customer's customer. And so this work is not meant to be a check the box. Sure, when you think about a D&I maturity model, there are 4 levels. Some organizations may be at the compliance level as they begin the journey. But what I would say is that many of us that are engaging in this work is looking to move our work to embedded and best in practice. So bring D&I into the business and case for action for the why. That's our workforce. We need the voice of the employee. That's our workplace. But our marketplace is demanding something different of our organizations. And so diversity is no longer the check the box, because business, communities, and our customers, and dare I say, my 3 girls are demanding it. They're going into the world of work demanding an expectation that organizations are purposeful in their environment and purposeful in including their voices. And so that's how I've moved us from this decision or this notion of DEI as check the box. This is very much a business related area. It's a profession, and it is a practice that is committed and connected to the business success of any firm.
I love that. And that's certainly what we're seeing corporations being called upon to do right now, right? To stand for more than just profits and shareholders. Thank you. That's fantastic. Well, I think this is all the time that we have for our panel today. Trey, Yemi, Bo, Aisha, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. I very much appreciate it.